Acha. Before going into the explanation, just a little bit of introduction. By way of introduction, let me tell you that as we all know that towards the end of the Old English period, we know that the Norman conquest took place, and the year you all know, 1066 AD. That was the year. Now this event that took place, that is the conquest of England by William the Conqueror, as he came to be known, William of Normandy, was destined to have a very profound influence on the English language. And until this time, before the Norman conquest took place, the English language had been more or less a kind of a pure tongue with a mixture of Latin, Celtic and Danish words. So it was a kind of mixture with words from these three languages. But after the Norman conquest, a change came over it, and it became more definitely a hybrid language. Now, what is a hybrid language? It is actually an amalgamation or a mixture of two or more elements. So when two or more elements get mixed, then the thing that emerges out of that mixture is called hybrid. So the English language became more hybrid in nature. Now, where was this place called Normandy? William was the Duke of Normandy. Actually, this was a district in France, on the northern coast of France, and this place was actually originally it was occupied by Norsemen. Actually, they are called Northmen. Northmen meaning the Scandinavians, people from the modern what the countries are now called Norway, Sweden, like that. So they were Northmen, which again became Norsemen, the word. So I think you are, Jay sir is doing Scandinavian influence with you, so you know about these Northmen or Norsemen. Now, the name Normandy, it derives its name from these bands of Northmen who settled there in the 9th and the 10th centuries. And as we see, these people, these Northmen, they possessed a very remarkable characteristic of adaptability. That is, they could adapt or adopt the different ideas and customs of those among whom they came to live in. And they soon absorbed the most important elements of the French civilization. And what was more important was that they soon gave up their own language and adopted the language of their new home. That is, the new language was of course French. And they modified French according to their own purposes. Now, with the Latin influence which we have done, French is of course another great fundamental formative influences on the English vocabulary. Now, as we know that the English language had come into contact with French, it was affected by it even before the Norman conquest to a small extent. And when the social, political, as well as the ecclesiastical, the religious relationships occurred, and As we know that the Anglo-Saxon king about whom I was referring, yesterday, it is Ethelred the Unready, who was ruling from 978 to 1016. He had married a princess, and eventually his son, who was called Saint Edward the Confessor, he was educated in France, and then he came to the throne of England. When he became king, he wanted to surround himself with his Norman friends and raise them to the posts of honor. So as we see that a good deal of Norman French, that is the French that was spoken by the Normans, it could have been spoken in the English court also before the Norman conquest as such. And in 1066, after William the Conqueror, he defeated the English in the Battle of Hastings, and he became the master of England. With this conquest, there was a reordering of the government and the upper social life of England. And as we see that a number of French words in different areas of English life came to be adopted. So after this conquest, the Norman conquest, English remained the language of the country, that is the country folk, the ordinary people. The French of the Norman kind became the language of the government, and quickly it became a necessity to many who had share in ruling. So as you see, even people who were not directly connected with the ruling of the country, that is, they were not associated with as such with the aristocracy. For example, people in the church, in the law courts, and they also came under the influence of this Norman French, and it became the language of the church, the nobility of the language of the nobility, the law courts of the learned professions, and in this way the Norman influence became quite pervasive. It spread to every part of sort of English life, and English, it became an uncultivated tongue and the language of an inferior race, because the Normans were obviously more advanced culturally, socially, economically, so they imposed their language, which was French, on the English people. And so, as we see that after the conquest, what William did, he placed his trusted followers in all the important positions. In all the important positions of the government, and as we will see how this extended, and there were positions of the state and government, of course, and he tightened his hold on the church as well, and thus he established himself as the head of the English nation, English people. Now, as the nobility and the clergy started to speak French, French naturally became a language, a most important language. It became the language of prestige somewhat. And even after almost 200 years after the Norman conquest, we see that French remained the language of ordinary intercourse among the upper classes in England. At first, in the initial years of the Norman conquest, what happened? That those who spoke French were of Norman origin. But soon, through a number of intermarriages and associations with the ruling classes, numerous people of English extraction who were purely English, they had nothing to do with the Normans, they found it kind of to their advantage to learn the new language. So they wanted to learn French, and they knew that could be a kind of a stepping stone towards their social or some kind of advancement in their state. So most Englishmen therefore made all-out efforts to learn French. However, some men, people of inferior status in life, they had to learn French words in order to interact with their French masters, because they did not understand English. So these people, they also had to learn French. As we have seen that the Normans were culturally and they were socially superior to the English, and they did not mix with the English intimately as the Scandinavian people had done before them. And they represented a higher culture, of course, a higher culture, as we see. And obviously, since they were superior, they were superior in terms of their social position, culturally they were superior, and all that. So we can see that obviously they sort of regarded England as something like a colony, and they maintained a contact with France and the French language, and they held a kind of position of aristocracy, which kept them at a distance from the common people of England. So with this kind of introduction, I think it would be now easy for you to look at and understand the type of way the French language had an impact on the English language. So as we see here in this slide, that the French influence was important, more important than the Scandinavian influence for more than one reason, and that is the historical and linguistic documents are quite clear during the French influence. So there are a number of documents which point to this period. The Normans, they were considered to be a more alien race, and they ruled over England for a long period to influence the language considerably. So obviously the English language came under the influence of French because the Normans had sway over England for quite a long period of time, and they represented higher culture, and of course we know that, and they represented a literature of their own. So after the Norman conquest, English was enriched in all the possible ways by the influence of French. So let us pass on to the next one. Now, who were the Normans? We discussed this, that they were the Norman French people. They resided in Normandy, which was a district in northern France. I already told you about this. So originally they were migrants from Scandinavia, but by the year 1066 they forgot their native tongue, they adopted French. And William, the Duke of Normandy, with his army, retinue means his army, he crossed the English Channel and he ravaged England, he attacked England. And his victory in the Battle of Hastings brought a radical change in the English social and cultural life. And the Anglo-Saxon nobility, which was there during those times in England, it was practically wiped out. gradually, and those places were filled by the Norman nobility. So as you saw that William replaced the English nobleman with his own men from the nobility. So obviously he wanted his own men to be in high positions in order to sort of facilitate his ruling of this country. And Norman prelates, that is people related to church, they occupied all the important positions in the English church. High military officials were all Normans. French merchants and craftsmen began to come to England in large numbers. So with the Norman conquest, also French merchants and all these craftsmen, they began to cross into England. The ruling class continued all their administrative works in French. So English was not used during this time as the official language for communication. Even after 200 years after the conquest, French remained the official language of England as well as of the English nobility in their ordinary conversation. So the English nobility actually, they also had to learn French, about which I was mentioning. The first impact of this powerful linguistic influence was an enrichment of the vocabulary of English. Obviously, a country which has been conquered by a foreign power, just as in our case, as we know that the English language that has come down to us because of the British occupation of our country. Of course, this is a foreign language, but it has become our own language in a way. So we are all students of English language and literature. So they have given this language to us, the British. Now, in the same way, as we see that the influence on the language was quite deep, and there was the enrichment of the vocabulary of English. Obviously, a huge number of French words started to come into English. The plain, bare and simple Old English took as many French words as possible, some for the dire necessity of expression, others for snobbery. So it was, there were two purposes mainly. One was necessity. So they had to learn French, they had to adopt these English words without these French words rather, and without them they could not do, of course, they could not carry on their official work. And the other was snobbery, meaning that it was a kind of a prestigious thing to know French words. So because they represented a higher culture. So the loan words, loan meaning obviously these words that were borrowed into the English language, suggest the nature of the relationship between the two races, the Normans and the English. It also throws light on the impact of a superior culture on an inferior one. So all these aspects we need to take into account. So we do have all these, we see how French came to sort of penetrate into all aspects of English life, and the superior culture of the French, the Norman French, they obviously, in a sense, they imposed themselves on the inferior race, that is the English. So now let us move on and see how the linguistic influence of the Normans became deep and permanent. French civilization and culture has had such a profound influence on the English that there is scarcely any department of English life which was not affected by this influence. So the linguistic influence of the Normans, it was so deep and permanent that French civilization, culture, it had a profound influence on the English. So So no department was untouched, and we will see how the words that were adopted, they come from different areas, different spheres of life. This influence is clearly reflected in the English vocabulary, which has been enriched by aristocratic words borrowed from the Norman conquerors. So the simple English words were supplemented. They were supplemented by the more advanced aristocratic words, which were adopted into the language. Thus, a large number of words belonging to different spheres like government and administration, legal and military, ecclesiastical, moral, food and cooking, games and sports, dress and fashion, art, literature and architecture, medical, feudalism, words of mutual relationships were borrowed by the English from their French masters. So as you can see, this is a huge area indeed, and it starts with the government and administration, because of course that was the primary thing that the French were doing. They were governing the country. So obviously these words relating to governance and administration would be adopted. Then there were the legal pertaining to law, French law and all that. The military words, because obviously the military was the main component which had helped to conquer England. Religious, that is ecclesiastical, moral, food and cooking. Now, the French actually, they were far superior in different fields. They were far superior to the English in areas of food and cooking, games, sports, dress and fashion. To some extent, they even are quite advanced even today. So even art, literature, architecture, everything, in every area, you will find that the English they had no alternative but to adopt these French words. So it was an all-pervasive kind of an influence, the French influence. Now we will move on to the next slide and see. We'll just study the categories one by one. So number one is the words relating to administration, government and politics. The French left the Old English words king, queen, lord, lady and earl intact. So when the French imposed their language on the English people, some of the Old English words, for example king, queen, lord, lady, earl, they were not replaced. They were there. So, but apart from these, nearly all words relating to government and the highest administration are French. So apart from these few words, you will find that the words that we will be now looking at, that is crown, state, government, reign, sovereign, power, minister, council, authority, parliament, people, nation, empire, royal, treaty, tax, public, office, mayor, noble, peer, duke, count, courtier, sir, madam, master, mistress, peasant, slave, servant. So as you can see, there are so many words which were actually of French origin, and so all these words, apart from the few that have been mentioned, were of French origin. So these words all relate to administration, government, the politics. So just memorize some of these words. You need not memorize all the words because it is not possible, of course, but keep in mind some of the words, so that would suffice. keeping in mind, as I told you when I was teaching Latin influence, just keep in mind 4 to 5 words which are very easy, which occur even we use them in our everyday life. For example, sir and madam you always use, so you will remember. And then state, for example, people, nation, like these. Tax, we have to pay taxes to the government. So public, office, these are all easy to remember. Now words relating to feudalism. We come to the second important category. Feudalism was imported from France. This was a system of government with the lord and the vassal or the serf working under him, the servant. And this was common in the medieval age. It was imported from France, and with it were introduced a number of words like prince, peer. Peer denotes the scale of rank. Court, courteous, noble, denoting court life. Honor, glory, heraldry, that is aristocratic lineage, denoting honor and glory. So these are some of the words that we might remember, we should try to remember. Court, courteous, noble, like that, which are related to feudalism. Now we will come to the words which are military words, that is. The aristocratic classes took into their hands the management of military affairs. So the French, of course, they controlled the military. The administrative power was based on military power, and the military affairs were strictly controlled by the French masses, and so nearly all the words in this field are of French origin. So obviously the words that have come down to us are of French origin. These are army, navy, war, peace, enemy, combat, skirmish, battle, defense, retreat, soldier, guard, spy. So like this it goes on. And as you can see, many of these words are quite familiar to us. We often come across these words when we read some report in the newspaper, or we ourselves use these words, like what we experienced earlier. So just remember some of these words, and it would be easier to remember, I think, war, peace, enemy, soldier, spy, captain, like that. So these are the first 3 categories. I hope you are finding this quite interesting, because as you can see, the English language has, as we were discussing in my first class with you on philology, I was saying that English was is regarded as a masculine language, and it has a kind of a tendency to adopt and devour all whatever it can lay its hands on. So it embraces all the influences, whatever it could adopt. So it was the Latin influence, then the Scandinavian, then the French. Now let us come to the next slide. Now we come to the law terms. This is number 4. And under the French rule, as we see, a well-organized legal system was established in England, and all the proceedings in a court of law were continued in French. So obviously with the new government coming into power, William established a very well organized legal system, and the mode of communication in the courts of law was, of course, French. The legal codes were written in French. English was done away with. The introduction of French law terms was a natural consequence of the fact that the power was in the hands of the Norman upper classes. So the aristocratic upper class Normans they were very much in power. They controlled all these legal matters, and they had their own language, French. So nearly all legal terms in English are of French origin, excepting law and bylaw. So these are the two words which are borrowed from Old Norse. So these are Old Norse words and which survive. These two words survive to this day. The French law terms are as follows. So again we will see a number of French law terms. What are these? These are justice, judgment, crime, just, judge, bar, plea, suit, sue, plaintiff, defendant, advocate, bill, petition, complaint, jury. So like this, I'm not reading all the words, but as you can see yourself that all these words, they relate to crime, its sort of legal redress, and everything related to legal matters, as you can quite see, arrest, warrant, convict, like that. So there are also, like the other categories, as we have seen, a number of these words which are of legal, which deal with legal matters. In every French counterpart of an English word, a technical expertise is observed. Burglary is a French contribution, though steal and theft are of English origin. So these words steal and theft, they are of English origin, they were there, but burglary, this word, is of French origin. The word petty was first introduced by the jurists from the French word petit, P-E-T-I-T, which is pronounced as petit. In such combinations as petit jury, petit means small, as you can, insignificant in English, and it also means the same, petit, in French. Petit jury, petit treason, petit constable, like that. So this word petit is now used in this way. Puisne legally means younger or inferior in rank. In English, it has become puny. So these transformations have undergone to these words. In many law terms, adjectives are invariably placed after their corresponding nouns in the usual French manner, though in English, the normal position of an adjective is always before its noun. So obviously you know this, that in English grammar the noun doesn't come first. So a big house, we don't say house big, like that. So the adjective would come first and then the noun. The adjective qualifies the noun, it describes what kind of a noun it is. So, but in French, this is not the case. As we see here, just look at this sentence. In English, it has become puny. So sorry. After that, in many law terms, adjectives are invariably placed after their corresponding noun. So the noun comes first. This is observed in such phrases as heir male, issue male, fee simple, advocate general, governor general, attorney general, etc. So these are the adjectives which are coming sort of later, as we see. And here it is the word other is reversed. Now let us now, I think you have understood here in this portion. I'll just do one more slide and we can stop. So now we come to the religious terms, the words which are borrowed from the sphere of religion. The churches of England were molded in the French manner, and all important ecclesiastical positions were occupied by French clergy. Thus, many ecclesiastical terms of French origin enriched the vocabulary of English, such as religion, theology, angel, sermon, homily, baptism, confession, prayer, lesson. So, just have a look at this list. It is quite a long list with a number of familiar words in it. For example, image, savior, faith, devotion, sacrifice. So, and the words that we have looked at earlier. This should be clerk. Sorry, this should be an R here. So, clerk doesn't mean the clerical jobs that those people who perform, not those clerks, but the clerks in the church who take down notes and who copy certain religious texts. So these are some of these ecclesiastical terms. Some words introduced as ecclesiastical words now belong to the common vocabulary. For example, rule, lesson, save, tempt, blame, order, nature. So these words are now do not have a religious connotation. They are not exclusively religious in nature. They are in fact used in our everyday speech, and obviously, as you can see, that during those times they had a religious connotation, but now, of course, a lesson is not just a religious lesson. It can have a secular, non-religious kind of a meaning. Now, saved does not mean just to the Christian concept of salvation or the saving of mankind by Christ, but also other things. So all these words, they have gone kind of a change. Now we come to the moral terms. As the clergy, who were teachers of religion, were also teachers of morality. So what should be the right way to behave? So the churchmen, they of course taught the common people about the right way to behave, what was good for them and what was bad. They were teachers of morality, what is good and what is bad. The whole gamut of words pertaining to moral ideas was introduced by them from French. Example: virtue, vice, charity, duty, conscience, grace, cruel, chaste, desire, jealous, pity, discipline, mercy, obedience, repent, ordain. So as you can see, there are a number of, as you can well observe, these words are quite common words, and we are familiar with these words. So these words have a kind of a moral connotation. So virtue, vice, charity, duty, cruel, chaste, desire, jealous. So all these have a kind of a moral connotation in there. So I would just stop here today.